Okay, Chapter 1, The Moral Purpose of the School. This is from John Dewey's Moral Principles in Education, 1909. An English contemporary philosopher has called attention to the difference between moral ideas and ideas about morality. Moral ideas are ideas of any sort whatsoever which take effect in conduct and improve it, make it better than it otherwise would be. So there we go. We got one, moral ideas. Two, there would be ideas about morality. So we're making a distinction between learning about morality and moral ideas. Moral ideas seems more like a verb, right? Let's read it again. Moral ideas are any sort whatsoever which take effect in conduct and improve it, make it better than it otherwise would be. Of course, who gets to define better, right? So the teleology. Of course, you can't get everything into a single word. That's why there's a whole book, right? Continuing on, similarly, one may say immoral ideas are ideas of whatever sort, whether arithmetical or geographical or physiological, which show themselves to making behavior worse than it would otherwise be. So there's a second. So we got immoral ideas making behavior worse. Of course, you still need to have a teleology marked out to know worse in what way. Let's see. And non-moral ideas, there's a third thing, right? Of course, we still have ideas about morality as well. But non-moral ideas, one may say, are such ideas and pieces of information that leave conduct uninfluenced for either the better or worse. Okay. And now for ideas about morality. May be morally indifferent or immoral or moral. There's nothing in the nature of ideas about morality, of information about honesty or purity or kindness, which automatically transmutes such ideas into good character or good conduct. Okay, so looks like we have three moving things. We have moral ideas. So an idea, right, philosophically, is that ideal, right? So when we hear the word idea, we should also think ideal when you read philosophy. So if you've read some Plato, right, the ideal right triangle is in the mind and in the world mind, right, the universe mind, where it can be perfect. And once it's drawn on a piece of paper, it's not perfect. I think mine angled this way a little bit. But even if I had a perfect, right, it still wouldn't be actually perfect because my hand might shake not that much. Someday maybe, right? But shake a little bit just because of the nature of the hand. Winds might blow. I mean, inside, not going to blow wind, but you know. So, ideal. Moral ideas are ideas of any sort which take effect in the conduct and improve it. So, for Dewey now, we think about that perfect triangle of Plato. Most happens inside the mind. But for Dewey, the moral ideas are only taking effect in conduct and improving it. So immoral ideas seem to be a subcategory of moral ideas, which make behavior worse. Non-moral ideas leave conduct uninfluenced. So if somebody's like out drinking every Thursday night and you have a non-moral idea posed to them, it doesn't change them. It seems a little more Christian than Platonic, doesn't it? I know Dewey was a famous humanist, secular humanist, so an atheist, right? He signed the first secular humanist manifesto. They've updated it since, obviously, but back in the 1800s, early 1900s, so early 20th century, I think it was. I'd have to look it up for sure. I'm sure some of you guys know about it. If you know about it, link to it down below. But yeah, I came across that a long time ago, and Dewey's name was on it. But this is like a Christian idea, right? I mean, James, right? Faith without works is dead. You show me your faith without works, and I'll show you my faith through my works. Even Paul knows that these things are expressed through works, right? So the moral ideas are expressed through works. So Dewey's not a Calvinist, that's for sure. Not a full Platonic idealist either. Then ideas about morality, he holds those low. It's just information, mere information. I'm going to write that down. Mere info. So this is how I mark up my books as a philosopher. I was glad to find one I hadn't written, and so before I developed the way that I mark up books, I didn't retain nearly as much, but actually when you write in books, you retain a lot more. This distinction between moral ideas and ideas of any sort whatsoever that have become a part of character and hence a part of the working motives of behavior and ideas about moral action that may remain as inert and ineffective as if they were so much knowledge about Egyptian archaeology. Hey, what's wrong with Egyptian archaeology? Is fundamental to the discussion of moral education. What if the kids are actually going to Egypt and digging? What are their Egyptian children? And they just go into their backyard and digging up things. Would that count for Dewey as moral education? I don't know. Let's see. The business of the educator, whether parent or teacher, parents are educators too, right? It's an important point. Most professional educators forget is a parent is a primary educator in kids' lives. Dewey recognized it, obviously, but other progressive educators don't, and they think parents are the enemy sometimes. Not all, obviously not all teachers. So when I say that, don't ever assume I'm talking all. I'm talking about some. Always some. So you just throw some in front of anything I say that sounds like I'm universalizing any of my own ideas as they emerge while I'm reading. Some teachers see parents as the enemy, right? You really want to educate these kids. They can go places. They can go live in a suburb and buy symphony orchestra tickets each year and have champagne over the boardwalk and all the stuff that's a good life for the educated American. But the parent is educating kids right from the start in a particular way of being. And maybe they have a little more say than a teacher. Not necessarily in Dewey, but in real life, right? The business of the educator, whether parent or teacher, is to see to it that the greatest possible number of ideas acquired by children and youth are acquired in such a vital way that they become moving ideas. Okay, so the first three are moving ideas. Obviously, the second two are moving in the wrong direction or not moving in the right direction. But sometimes God has a weird plan. I know, this is not doing this me. God has weird plans for us, and sometimes we move the wrong direction before we get the right direction. Sometimes we move the wrong way before we go the right way. So moving ideas. Motive forces in the guidance of conduct. This demand and this opportunity make the moral purpose universal and dominant in all instruction, whatsoever the topic. So if you're teaching music, moral education is universal and dominant. I think I've made that argument about our need to educate kids for eco-literacy so that they can solve some of these problems that have been increasing over the last hundreds of years. Were it not for this possibility, the familiar statement that the ultimate purpose of all education is character forming, character education, character forming, but character education, I just made this argument last summer in my paper at Vancouver, that all education is character education. I could have just thrown in a quote from Dewey, apparently, one I hadn't read for a decade, but put a big star by that so I remember. That paper isn't published yet. It's in review. Third review, second review, third review. I don't know if it's going to make it through the review process for that journal. Send it somewhere else. But we'll see. Maybe it will. Purpose of all education is character forming would be hypocritical pretense, for as everyone knows, the direct and immediate attention of teachers and pupils must be, for the greater part of the time, on intellectual matters. So you must intellectualize music for most of the time. But even though you're doing that most of the time, the truth is you're still doing character education. You're still doing it. Maybe it's reading between Dewey. I think that's another part of being a philosopher, is how you come to these disagreements with other philosophers, is you read between them. It is out of the question to keep direct moral considerations constantly uppermost. But it is not out of the question to aim at making the method of learning, the acquiring of intellectual power, the assimilating subject matter, such as they will render behavior more enlightened, more consistent, more vigorous than otherwise would be. I feel like Skinner would agree with this, right? So much focus on behavior. I could see how behaviorism became a big movement following Dewey's big contributions. The same distinction between moral ideas and ideas about morality explains for us a source of continual misunderstanding between teachers in schools and critics of education outside of the schools. What if that includes me? Because I'm a critic of education inside the schools. The later look through the school programs and the school courses of study and do not find any place set apart for instruction in ethics or moral teachings. So here's a question. I feel like we could have a place set apart for ethics or moral teachings, in addition to being it done in every other subject. But I don't think Dewey leaves that room. But what of both? A place where the kids can actually speak to their ethics and their morality, with teachers who are trained in navigating tough conversations about those things that kids face every day, but also their communities are facing. In addition to it being interwoven into every subject, whether music or reading or mathematics. Somewhere where it's brought together. A philosophy course, per se. Yeah, I don't know. But then again, this is all focused on children. There's only so much you can do with age, right? I could be an introduction to, I don't know. I could introduce kids to the modern jazz quartet. It'd be a wonderful first experience of it for them. But it'll be more meaningful as they come back to it in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 70s, 80s, and rethink about it. As you can read a book, right? But rereading it is much better. Hence this. Then they assert that the schools are doing nothing or next to nothing for character training. They become emphatic and even vehement, even about the moral deficiencies of public education. So here's the thing, Dewey. There are moral deficiencies in public education. As somebody who's actually worked in them and not just at Columbia University sitting in the ivory tower theorizing about things, pretending like you know, right? There are actual moral deficiencies in public education, in the structure of it. We teach kids that they need to set and be compliant all day. Compliance is the highest moral value taught in public schools. Now, I'm not saying you don't need to learn some compliance, but I'm saying that adults and children reject compliance, and we end up with a populace and its politics that is just anti-authoritarian rebels without a clue. And that's Democrats and Republicans. Of course, it's shown itself more in Republicans in recent years. But both sides have rebels without a clue, unwilling to think deeply about or discuss or converse or debate even ideas that they've already put into their body and their mind and their soul just because it's a party platform. And when the party platform changes and the Democrats go from thinking that tariffs are good for workers to thinking they're bad, and they did that, there was a party switch in the last 10 years. Continuing on. The school teachers, on the other hand, represent these criticisms as an injustice and hold not only that they do teach morals, but that they teach them in every moment of the day. Not all teachers hold that. Some think they're taking an objective view, whether they are or not, but some really do think they're taking an objective view and not teaching morals. Especially math teachers. I don't know that I'd run into a math teacher who would make this statement that Dewey said that teachers say. Of course, maybe he's not universalizing, though he did say universal. He did use that word already. Continue on. 5 days a week. 5 days in a week. Well, in this contention, the teachers in principle are right. If they are in the wrong, it is not because special periods are not set aside for what, after all, can only be teaching about morals. I don't know that. See, this is where I disagree with Dewey. I don't think it could just be teaching about morals if it brings in the actual experiences. So if the kids come in, they'd say, hey, in music class, we listened to Threnody for the Victims of Hiroshima. And we talked about it some. And then in social studies class, we're learning about the bombing of Hiroshima. And if it was a separated class teaching about morals, it would be an opportunity for deep conversations that matter, ones that really do change the kids internally. But because their own characters, or their school atmosphere and ideals, or their methods of teaching, or the subject matter which they teach, are not such in detail as to bring intellectual works into vital union with character, so that they become working forces in behavior. So here's the thing. I think this in detail part needs that time for reflection. And a separated class can be that place for reflection. Without discussing, it doesn't have to be, but it can be. Without discussing, therefore, the limits or the value of so-called direct moral instruction, or better instruction about morals, you brought it in right in your first paragraph. So why not discuss the limits and values of so-called direct moral instruction? You got such a short book, you could have made it 100 pages longer. What is this book like? 64 pages. It may be laid down as fundamental that the influence of direct moral instruction, even at its very best, is comparatively small, Yeah, I don't agree with it. I don't think he made the argument. And about the slight in amount and slight influence, when the whole field of moral growth through education is taken into account. So maybe, but I don't think he's made that argument. I think he's not taking the time to make that argument. He's just stated it. This is more like those people who read the Communist Manifesto and think they've read Marx. That's not where Marx made his argument. That was a manifesto. This is a manifesto so far. But let's see. This larger field of indirect and vital moral education, the development of character through all the agencies, instrumentalities, and materials of school life is therefore the subject of our present discussion. Okay. So we're going to focus on that, which is good. So it's a indirect moral instruction is equal to vital moral instruction. There we go. First chapter done. Have a blessed day.